You will need to fuel regularly, and you will need to rest regularly. This is a marathon and not a sprint, but oh my God, it's worth it. It is the most valuable work, I think, that I have ever done.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Rethinking Education podcast. Rather excitingly this week, I was contacted by someone who works for another podcast asking whether we might be able to come to some sort of mutual promotional arrangement. Ordinarily, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable with the idea of you seeing other podcasts, but in this case, I am happy to make an exception. Now I'm Grown Up is a new podcast hosted by Jenny Murray, who, as you may know, is the host of Women's Hour on Radio 4 for the last 30 years or so. The podcast is sponsored by Now Teach, a new organisation that's dedicated to persuading people in their older years to switch careers into the classroom. It's kind of like the opposite to Teach First, which is about bringing high-level graduates into the profession, but it's sort of doing the same at the other end of the age range, I suppose. The podcast shines a light on the experience of professionals who are trading the courtroom for the staff room, or trading writing of newspaper columns to writing reports. And it touches on topics such as the 100-year life and educational inequality, and includes input from educational experts and from young people themselves on the ideas behind pursuing a second career in teaching. And given the alarming figures around teacher recruitment and retention in particular, this is a really welcome movement, I think, because, we need more teachers, especially teachers in their older years. We've got the youngest teaching workforce in the whole of the developed world, as far as I'm aware. So the first episode is called The 100-Year Life, which is about the fact that the majority of young people living in developed countries today are likely to live to be more than 100. I've even heard it said recently that the first 1,000-year-old person has probably already been born, but that makes my head hurt too much, so let's just park that for now. But it's clear that lifespans are getting longer, and it is a sobering thought that my son's grandchildren may well be alive in the 23rd century. This brings up all kinds of questions about how we educate young people, which we don't really want to get into right now. But anyway, Now I'm Grown Up is a fascinating podcast, and you can listen to it with my blessing. Interestingly, Jenny Murray seems to be considering becoming a teacher at the age of 71, which is kind of cool. I really hope she does. Funnily enough, I think Jenny Murray would really like today's show, which features a conversation with 4 incredible, inspirational women who have taken matters into their own hands in recent years and set up alternative schools, or in one case, an alternative to school, 3 in England and 1 in the Dominican Republic. Avid listeners of the Rethinking Education podcast will probably know that the one in the DR is my good friend, co-author and Learning to Learn copilot, Kate McAllister, who featured in episode 9. And I really recommend you listen to that, by the way, if you haven't done already. My other 3 guests today are people that I've come to know only very recently as a result of having set up this podcast. They are Kath Pratt, who has set up an alternative school called Soweni down on the cliffs of Cornwall; Hayley Peacock, who has set up a proudly progressive private school called Atelier 21 in Crawley; and Lucy Stevens, who has set up a democratic school in Croydon known as the New School, which is free to attend because it's funded by private philanthropists, rather fascinatingly. There are links to various articles and websites relating to all of these initiatives in the show notes if you're interested to find out more. Having 4 guests at once is a bit of a departure from the usual format of the podcast, but I think it's probably kind of obvious why I've decided to do this episode. These 4 women are a living embodiment of people who aren't just rethinking education, they're actually rebuilding it, they're redoing it now, every day. And each of them are voting with their feet with their own children attending the schools that they have created. As Hayley says at one point, it really is very cool, especially if you're an education geek like I am. A quick note before we begin. If you've ever worked in education, you may have noticed that teachers are quite fond of the odd acronym. And as I was editing this episode, I noticed that there were a few acronyms being bandied around, and not all of them were defined, listeners. I won't go through these now, but should you encounter an acronym in the course of this conversation and you're not sure what it stands for, have a look in the show notes and you may well find it explained in a little mini glossary. Okay, without further ado, on with the show. Okay, deep breath. So, Kath Pratt, Lucy Stevens, Hayley Peacock, and Kate McAllister, welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast.
Thanks for having us, James.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. So this is going to be interesting because I've only ever had one guest at a time previously, and I've set the bar high and gone from one to 4 people. So this is going to be interesting. It's going to take a slightly different format to how we usually organise these conversations. So let's just start with a very brief introduction from each of you, just to introduce yourself to listeners, your name and the school that you are or were involved with, and where you are in the world, and then we'll go from there. So let's go Kath first.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kath Pratt. I live in Cornwall, in Perranporth, St Agnes area. I'm mum to 4 boys who are amazing and full of beans. They're a self-directed bunch, and they're 9 down to 2. I am co-founder of Soweni, which means thrive in Cornish. And it's a learning community space that we're building currently at a wonderful eco park. And that's kind of where I'm at, really. It's quite an extraordinary journey, which I'm looking forward to telling you more about because I haven't really shared it before. So
we're looking forward to hearing. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Lucy.
Hi. So I'm Lucy Stevens, and I'm the founder, director and co-head at the moment of the New School, which is a democratic school in South London. We're actually a Croydon school, but we're right on the edge of the borough. So we sort of sit tri-borough actually with Lambeth and Lewisham. And our young people come from about 6 different local authorities, which is quite interesting because we're very popular with homeschoolers, I guess former homeschoolers. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Hayley.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me on. My name's Hayley Peacock, and I'm the founder and head of school of Atelier 21. We are a through school for children reception years at age 4 to eventually will be 16 to stay with us and get some exam results at some stage. But at the moment, our oldest children are between 12 years old. So we've got our current year 7s will be our oldest year group, and then we've got them all the way down to 4. We have 54 children at the moment. We are a fully registered full-time school, both primary and secondary. And we're based in West Sussex, just on the edge of Crawley. And we have parents and families from probably all around a kind of good, almost a sort of 30 to even 40 plus radius all around the area: Sussex, Surrey, Hampshire, East Sussex, West Sussex, etc. And that's us.
Lovely, thank you. And lastly, Kate.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kate McAllister, and I am the founder, director, and head, I guess, of The Hive, which is in Dominican Republic. And it's an all-through alternative to school. It's not really a school. Our youngest is 3, our eldest is 16, and our students come from very different backgrounds. We have local Dominican children who are on scholarships. We have local international children like my daughter and the people who live in my community who come from other places who work here in Dominican Republic. And then we have world schooling families who are these traveling homeschooling or alternative schooling families who come for multiples of 6-week sessions. So we kind of run this double program: full-time students who are here all year and the students who visit. And it's bilingual, English and Spanish.
Thank you. So hopefully it will be obvious to listeners why it is that I have gathered you all together here today, because you all have at least one huge thing in common. And three of you, as you know, I've worked with Kate for many years, but the other three of you I didn't know until very recently, until I started this podcast. Some of you I met through the Mighty Network, and some sort of through word of mouth. And somebody described this Mighty Network recently as being like a bat signal for, like, you know, for innovative educators. And it's just this space for people to come together, to see one another, often for the first time, and just to sort of cross-pollinate ideas and to just to see what's out there. And so I'm really interested to hear more about your stories. And I'm also really interested to hear, like, how many of you are there out there? You know, like, how many people are there doing things like the things that you've been doing recently? So I am really at the beginning of this journey, and I am all ears and eyes wide open. So we're going to go through each of your stories in turn. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking with each of you in turn. And please feel free to question one another, as well as me asking questions, so that we can hear a bit more about each of your individual stories. And then at the end, we'll have a bit more of a sort of a general conversation about any themes that have emerged through our conversations. So that's the plan. So let's get started. We'll start with you, Kath. So you were involved, or are involved, with this project Soweni. Is that the pronunciation, Soweni?
That's right, Soweni, yes.
Which means thrive in Cornish. And so what is it that started this? Oh, you posted something really lovely recently on the Rethinking Education Mighty Network. I don't know if that's where it started for you, sitting on a beach somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. Indeed, the germ of Soweni sort of started on that beach. Before I taught in mainstream, I did the Wandsworth skit, and prior to that, I did a master's in anthropology of learning and cognition, which I guess is where everything sort of started. And I've been rethinking education, I think, probably since then. And I moved from London via sort of South Devon to the Caribbean and taught the IB PYP. And it was at one moment when I was stood on a beach, and I had literally, like, an hour before, found out I was pregnant with my first boy, and I was standing there looking out to sea and thinking about the vastness of the world and the universe, and how incredible I had this little spark of life growing inside me, and who was going to join Rich, my husband, and I. And it was an amazing kind of expansive thought. And then I sort of looked down, and there were these little fish nibbling my toes. And it all sounds quite idyllic, but I knew they were poisoned, these fish. And I looked inland, and I could see the smoke from the huge incinerator that we had on Tortola that was just burning the rubbish, and they were just spewing effluent and raw sewage into the sea. So you couldn't eat the fish, like, even the snorkeling was slightly taking a life in your hands. And it just felt deeply sad. And I suddenly thought, I'm bringing a child into this world. And it felt like a microcosm of what we're doing to the planet. And then I felt very, very kind of thoughtful at that point. And how could we bring a child up in this world? And then my mind kind of spun to the children that I'd come from London to teach in the Caribbean, and they were so incredible and alight with their questions and passion to do something about the plight of the planet, and also have agency in their own lives and in their own stories. So they had created just the previous week a wonderful picture of Picasso's Guernica, but they'd kind of done it as a mosaic, and it kind of illustrated all of the issues that Tortola was suffering with its environmental problems and lack of political will to do anything about it and do anything differently. And I had helped them get in touch with the folk in Road Town, who were the main political lobby groups, I suppose, and we managed to get it framed and put up in the town hall there, and it was all to do with them, and it was a really powerful message. And And I thought, these are exactly the sorts of children and sorts of thinkers that I need to somehow enable back in the UK. And we were always planning to come back. I thought I need to create that environment, that absolutely key environment, to enable these children to bloom in whatever direction they go. That soil, that kind of the stuff that we're pouring into the soil, needs to be right in order for children to be the best people that they can be. So when I started Soweni, I came back from the Caribbean, and I had this burning question in my head of like, what if we started from scratch? What if we started a school completely without any of the stuff that we're kind of fed while we're in the school, and try something really different? And also my other burning question was, why are children so incredible? They're just the best learning organisms that we know. And what is it that really drives them and makes them so incredible? And why is it we are systematically removing that kind of curiosity and excitement about learning through our system? So that was the beginning of Soweni, kind of the actual project, I suppose. And before that, just thinking about me as a child, like I was always a gap through the hedge kind of child. I never really liked someone telling me that no, I couldn't go there because that was someone else's land. There was fields just next to where I grew up, and I was constantly in trouble, kind of, because I'd snuck through there trying to spot deer and had sticky weed in my hair, and I was a little bit of a wild one. So it's no surprise I'm trying quietly in my own little way to try and do something a bit differently and kind of bust through that hole in the hedge, if that makes sense. Anyway, so that's the beginning of it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And so you had this, it's a very moving picture that you paint there, and although it's obviously quite specific to that point of time that you were at, with you were talking about, like you say, with this literally a seed inside you, I think that probably many people can relate to that as parents, that like thinking about, like this is personal now. This is not just about what kind of a school do I want to work in, but what kind of a world do I want my kid to grow up in, and what are the values that I want to see reflected in the way that they're educated, and what's the reality and what's possible and so on. And so you came back to Cornwall. So how did Soweni come about? And what one thing that I'm interested to hear from each of you about is, like, this, many people have probably thought like, oh, if I ruled the world, if I ran my own school, sort of thing. But you've all, actually made it happen. And it seems like such a massive thing to do. And so, like, where do you even begin with that? What was the big, like, practically, what was the first move?
I sort of scooped up a whole load of families, and mostly through sort of orating my passion about what to do. And actually, I'm going to share with you a little story that I wrote. I pulled it out for this podcast because I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder if it's still relevant. So in Cornwall, we have a story called The Magic Ointment. And so bear with me, I'm going to just read this to you because this kind of helped start the whole thing rolling. So I wrote this with my son, Lox, who at the time was 4. He's now 9, so this is a while ago, but it's rather sweet. So, The Magic Ointment. Lox had just finished his last Biff, Chip and Kipper school reading book and was feeling unfulfilled. In need of a real adventure, a proper story, something with pirates? A giant, maybe? Just then, he spotted a small brown bottle with the words, "See Me," tied around the neck on a scrappy aging label. "See Me" was what his teacher sometimes wrote at the bottom of his spelling test, and the words generally made him shudder. But this was intriguing. The bottle wasn't there a moment ago. He was sure of it. Reaching out, he took the bottle and opened the crumbling cork stopper. A wisp of green smoke, which smelt faintly of damp earth, escaped. He held the bottle up. There was nothing in it. He looked down the neck closely, holding it up to his eye like a telescope. Still nothing. Then, ow! He dropped the bottle, which clattered to the floor and rolled under his bed. He rubbed his right eye and blinked. Standing before him with an amused smirk was a small green creature. "See me?" it inquired gleefully. "Great stuff, that's Soweni juice. But that was our last drop." What? How? Who are you? stammered Locks. I'm Nan Jizzle the Spriggan, he announced proudly, and I'm on a special mission to find you because we're all in very great trouble. What do you mean? All of us are very worried that you children won't see us anymore because we have run out of Soweni juice, and it takes a whole lot of memories, wisdom, and love to make it. Who's us? Just then, a window flew open and a huge wave washed in, soaking Locks and Nan Jizzle. Locks gasped. Sitting on his bed was a girl with flowing red hair and a kind smile. She flapped her fishy tail gently and held out an old copper kettle. You make it in here, whispered Mavora, the mermaid of Zena. Ask everyone in your village, your parents, your friends, for something that feels important to them. It can be anything, advice, a story, a memory, some piece of wisdom, even a regret. If they hold this flower to their forehead and then put it in with love, we can make more Soweni juice, and your children will be able to see us always if you choose to put some on your eyes. But be quick. We are fading in a mist of tests. Locks took the kettle and ran out of the door. He visited every house he knew and collected many flowers from the smiling villagers, each imbued with something important. He rushed back to Nan Jizzle and Mavora the mermaid. They beamed at him and started to stir and sing. Oh goodness, there's a song. Shall I sing it?
Love it.
Okay. Soweni, keep us flowing, flowing and growing. Soweni, keep us flowing, help us to see magic across the world, the fire deep inside ourselves. Soweni, keep us flowing, help us to see. There we go. so yeah. I scooped up a whole bunch of parents anyway, and giving various talks at the Eden Project and places. And they were broadly, and they will happily admit, a bunch of kind of anarchists who were just keen to try something different and to do something different. And we created a community. It's the village that we all need, and we had all sorts of parents. We had musicians, we had doctors, we had face painters, we had teachers, like all who had this kind of like vision to do something in a different way. And Cornwall's so wonderful and so full of places and magic and natural wonder that it felt like a kind of great place to start. So that's what we did, and setting up the community was fun. And then we had the big task of how we actually build it. And I knew that this was going to be a pilot phase that I wanted to sort of see if it worked. And so I looked around for lots of land. There were farms that I talked to. There were various plots of land with polytunnels on, and we looked for ages to try and find the right spot. And eventually we were very lucky, and some parents had an acre of land on the Cornish cliffs. And so we thought, oh, this is perfect. So we had some log cabins, and we converted a sort of old double garage into a sort of Reggio type creative studio. And we had a huge 7-meter teepee as well. And there we did about 18, we were planning to do about 18 hours a week. And with all the Ofsted stuff, we managed to do it through having no more than, we had 15 children. They were mixed age. They were aged 4 to 8 at that time. And we had fantastic IB educators as well, and some forest school teachers, and also primary teachers who were forest school trained as well. And we all trained up. We had to train up because of the Ofsted stuff as childminders, which felt strange. And that worked actually really well. As a way of doing it, we had all of our policies and procedures all absolutely watertight. And Ofsted came. They came 3 times, and they came the first 2 times, and they said, "This is incredible." One actually was welling up, saying, "This is the future of education." And so we're really happy. This is like we're doing this pilot project and it's really working. We're managing to do everything absolutely the way that we should. And then the third time they came, I could tell you about that now, or maybe later. But basically, we had something shifted in the government's kind of rhetoric and narrative around illegal schools. And one day, and sadly, it was the day after my father-in-law had died, so everything was pretty raw anyway. They came in their blacked out mobile and did, as I think James always refers to, the sort of dementor thing. And they said we shouldn't be doing what we were doing, despite the fact that everything had all been fine previously. And they threatened us with Crown Prosecution Service and all of that stuff, and said we could carry on provided we dropped down to 15 hours, which was fairly arbitrary. And the kids were really quite intimidated and quite scared. And we did this sort of, looking back on it, a fairly comedy routine where the children were really worried, and another friend managed to usher them into the house to sort of talk to them and sort of defuse the situation. And the rest of the children, sort of Von Trapp style, we were booked to go to the local retirement home because we used to go there every week. And go and spend an hour with the residents there. And so Von Trapp style, they were kind of like ushered out onto the cliff path, which was near where we were. And they sort of went for a very long walk to the retirement home. And eventually, we had everything back and they said we hadn't done anything wrong, which was great. It took about 3 months. But at that time, I was about to give birth anyway. So this happened in November and I gave birth in early January. So we just said, actually, let's just wrap up the pilot now, and let's just focus on now building it where we want it to be built, which is up at this fabulous spot on the cliffs again, overlooking a valley with all of the old mining works and everything. It's just really beautiful, and down to the sea as well. So that's where I'm focused at the moment, is getting that up and running again. And there's so much in there that I want to talk about, because all of the learning of the kids and everything is fantastic. So yeah, that's how we kind of set it up, really, and where it is at the moment.
Okay, and so it's to be continued. So you sort of having a pause after this pilot study and licking your wounds from this bruising Ofsted experience. And I think that we'll probably come back to talk about Ofsted later on. I know it came up in our pre-chat just a bit earlier. It's obviously part of the gritty reality, isn't it, that we face when we start a dream like this. And as you say, it does seem like something changed in their thinking around illegal schools. There's definitely been a shift in policy, but we'll come on to that. Thank you. Do any of the rest of you have any questions for Kath at this point?
I was just going to ask what was their thinking about dropping down to 15 hours? How was that going to make any difference to them?
I'm not sure.
No.
It was a completely arbitrary thing. And then we asked to have the report and they said no. And we said, could we put a freedom of information request in for the report? And they said no. So actually at that point we thought, let's not poke the hornet's nest anymore and just, wind up for the moment.
Yeah, I have come across that before, because when I used to work at the Self-Managed Learning College in Brighton, the reason that that's a college and not a school, although the young people there are aged sort of 9 to 16, is because of the number of hours that they do. And because it's limited to, say, 3 hours a day, then that's like, I think there's some legal definition of what constitutes a school somewhere. So I think that's why that is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. If you've got children of compulsory school age, and you've got 5 of them, and you're teaching them, it was 20 hours when we were doing it. I think they've brought it down now to 18.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got a couple of minutes left in your slot, so maybe do you want to just share with us a little sort of a vignette, or like a slice of what it was like a day in the life of Soweni when it was firing on all cylinders? Paint a picture of what it was like.
when we were rocking and rolling. Yes, absolutely. So we had a fabulous community of parents, as I said, and we used to do these things called inquiring sessions, which we shortened to Insquiring, and that's where the parents would come in and share their skills. So we had these wonderful musicians, and they came in, and we'd have children sort of dancing across the lawn with all their violins, and they were doing a wonderful sort of unit of inquiry, to borrow the IB's term, on Under the Earth, and they were doing they'd been at the beach hammering like crazy, finding all these geodes, because where we are, we're right on a fault line, and they'd found all these incredible crystals. So yeah, that had been our previous day's trip, was at the beach, hammering away. And then the musicians came in, and they started to produce a literal rock song. So the children wrote it, and then the musicians then helped them record it and helped do backing tracks and all of that sort of thing. And the kids were absolutely on fire with the whole thing. And I can put it, if you like, James, I can send it to you, the rock song. We can put it in the show notes. Lovely. But it was quite extraordinary. So the other things we used to do, so they were the inspiring sessions where the parents could bring a skill. It was always quite a challenge, because unschooling the parents was probably the biggest thing. Is shifting, and Kate's nodding. It's shifting that way of like, this is what school looks like, and they should be doing this, and I should be standing over them and checking their work, to inspire them first, and then we can see where they go, and try not to turn everything into a learning opportunity either. Like, they need a lot of unstructured kind of time where they can just play and experiment without a grown-up saying, oh, what have you noticed about that? So that was a challenge for the parents, I think, to kind of just shift their thinking. Where was I going with this? Yeah, so we're doing the inspiring sessions. Yes, so we tended to do those in the afternoon, and the parents would bring an activity. And then they'd be quite surprised when the children were kind of like, okay, we're excited about this activity for about 10 minutes, and then off. And then they were off doing something else. And the parents were left there going, but. I was like, no, honestly, this is great, because you've provided that spark, and they'll probably, come round and come back to it and bring it into another one of their project cycles or something at some point. So that was interesting. And then in the mornings, we tended to do, the children's energy tended to be, they'd come in and they would literally climb up the trees. Like that was the first thing they would do. They would swing out the trees, up the trees, they'd bond. There was quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of excitement for about the first hour. And then finally they sort of like come back down, and we'd eat together. And we always made bread together, which was great as well. And then we'd do some slightly more focused stuff, where we were doing, they were doing some measuring and jumping, and we'd sort of bring the elements of maths and literacy into things, but it wasn't so explicit. And then we'd have lunch, and then it was the afternoon. So we kind of, with the inspiring session. So we had a kind of lovely kind of energy that just sort of bobbed and flowed, and it was beautiful. The children absolutely loved it, and it really felt like it reflected their natural kind of energy. And that again went to the core of my question of just like, why are these guys so incredible, and what do they need in order to make them so? And start questioning everything from all of the sort of cyclical energy flows of like the school year starting in September, in autumn, where things should start to be sort of shutting down and curling up, ready for incubation, to the school day, and why are we getting children sitting down at these points when they really want to be exploding in almost a sort of spring-like energy. So yeah, I think the Soweni year, when we get up and running, is going to run probably from February until kind of November. And then maybe the world schooling thing might happen, and we'll all have to come to the Dominican Republic for Christmas.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there are definitely lots of parallels with what's happening at the Hive, with following the natural rhythms of the child's day and so on. So I think we'll see that when we come on to Kate. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it sounds almost like ridiculously idyllic. Like you would want your kid to be there, wouldn't you? And you can see why these people would want to trust you with their young people. And thank you also for being the first person to ever sing on the podcast. Hopefully not the last, although there's no pressure for the rest of you. Bonus points will be awarded if you do, though. So thank you for that. Amazing. So let's come on to you, Hayley. So you decided to set up Atelier 21. Is this your first venture of this nature?
Yes and no. It's the first school I've ever set up, but I've spent 12 years running and building a nursery group. So I've been working inspired by the Reggio Emilia approach, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, sort of general educational reform and divergent thinking within education and its future for quite a long time. And so I like to think I've been breeding the school slowly for 10 years, I'd say. And then suddenly it was here, and it was all about the right time for me and the right time within the business and financially, etc. Because it's, takes a lot, not just will, particularly when you're jumping all in and going and opening a primary and secondary school in one from day dot. So when Kath was talking about, a pilot period, I felt quite sort of jealous, like you had sort of time to kind of work out how you do it differently. Whereas us, it was like, if you're doing it, you're doing it and you damn well better make it work type thing. And that's where we are now. Has to work, is working great, but, always had to work. And of course, interestingly, we got thrown the old COVID side punch, which was brilliant because I signed a 25-year lease on a very large 1,000 square metre old 19th century building 2 weeks before COVID hit. So it was a case of, if I wasn't sure if COVID would make a difference, it's too late now. We're doing it, whatever. And also, the break clause of that lease doesn't kick in for 10 years. So I'm 10 years in, whether I like it or not. But I joke, and because a lot of parents, one of the things they do ask me, and I understand why they ask me, is how financially secure is the school, and is it going to be around for a long time? If I bring my child here at age 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, are you still going to be around when they're 16 for them to see their education right the way through? Because it's part of the appeal for choosing us, which I can answer, very securely, because obviously the advantage of having had a successful business for 12 years, which was already employs 100 people and is kind of a really good base. Then yes, financially we have a safety net, which I think in some cases of other alternative or progressive schools that haven't necessarily always lasted the distance, I know that's sometimes been a factor, and it was something that I wasn't going to launch into unless I knew I absolutely had the means to see it through until it was properly wiping its own face. So basically my sort of story, if you like, is that I started out as a broadcast journalist. I had 3 children under 4 at the time, including twin girls who were born at 24 weeks. So they were very early, very sick for quite a long time, about the first 2 years of their life, in and out of hospital. And so that kind of cut my broadcasting career quite to a halt. So when you're going for news jobs and radio jobs and then you tell them you've got 3 young children, they look at you like you've got 2 heads. So I thought, right, okay, I'm a bit done for now. I can't really do this, and I also can't really afford to do this because the childcare just eat up all my salary. And so I thought I'd better do something different. And I was very, very interested in child development and parenting and just the whole world of education. It just, as soon as I had my own children, like a lot of people, it just pulled me into this. I was just fascinated about the whole relationship between parenting, education, child development. So I ended up pointing my journalism in that direction. I was writing for some parenting magazines and bits and bobs. I had my own little radio show in Brighton, actually, on a community radio station there for a while, etc. And then, of course, realised I really couldn't carry on down this road because I had very small children, and thought, well, if I run my own nursery, I'll have childcare in place. I can run a business, which I always liked the idea of, and it will be in an area that I'm really fascinated in. And I just didn't look back. And having absolutely adored my previous career and always thought it'd be what I did till I died, it was really interesting to replace that with something that I just literally never looked back to. So fast forward, 10, 12 years on, 10 years on, I then thought my little how did we start and why did we start story is basically this. So my nursery group, we've done quite well. We've won a lot of awards. This year in February, we won UK Nursery Group of the Year. 5 years ago, we won UK Nursery of the Year. We've won quite a lot of awards in innovation and blah, 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 blah. So that led us to opening a training school, which meant we do, a fair bit of consultancy for other nursery groups, and we get asked to go out and do lots of lovely speaking at universities and quite a lot of international speaking, which is just amazing. Has been a huge, benefit of my career and something I've loved. So in 2019, in May 2019, very much around this time, actually, 2 years ago, I was in Kuala Lumpur doing a large, big conference, an international conference, which was awesome. And of course, when you get paid to go to Kuala Lumpur, you have a few days holiday on the back of it, obviously. And so I was in a lovely hotel, and I was having a sunbathe in my little 5-day trip with my wife, who'd come with me. And I was laying on the sunbed, and I was just thinking to myself, you know what? Because I had 4 children by this point, by the way, and they were a lovely private school. I'm very lucky. And I thought to myself, this is actually getting ridiculous. I'm now being paid to literally fly around the world. And in the previous 2 years, I've been to America, China twice, blah, blah, whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm actually getting paid to fly around the world on sort of a semi-regular basis now to try and inspire people about educational reform and how things can be done differently and the amazing potential of education through a new lens, blah, blah, blah. And all the money I earn, I'm giving my own children the exact opposite experience. And that was it. That was the light bulb moment for me. It was just like, I can't do it anymore. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't have all my energy go into trying to make something better and inspire people for other people's children, whilst I send mine off looking like they work in Canary Wharf in little jackets, going to be petrified of making a mistake and obsessing about rubbing out the wrong spelling and crying because the teacher, wasn't overly, knocked out by the piece of writing or whatever. It just all was really starting to bother me. Now, I don't want that to be inferred in the wrong way, because it wasn't that they were having a bad time. They really weren't. It is a lovely school they went to, and they had a lovely time. But lovely time probably describes it best. So it wasn't dreadful, but the things that I really noted by the time my daughters, my older daughters, which are 12-year-olds now. So at the time they were about 10, and they had no capacity or tolerance for thinking in a divergent way, or even wanting to think, creatively or differently, or get into any sort of debate or conversation which was challenging. It was like, well, why are you doing that? Like, why would you even bother asking me that stupid, weird, slightly quirky question? And they just didn't see the point of it. They also were, as I say, their motivation was very, very much extrinsic, about pleasing teachers and being good and being rewarded for being good and compliant. And they always were at school. And I just thought, this is really wrong. I still don't think we've allowed them to just unravel and then blossom into who they really are. And so that was really a big driver. And also my youngest daughter was about to start reception in the following September. So I thought, you know what, if I get on with it, if I find a way to get this school that's been brewing in me for 10 years open in 15 months' time, I can have my daughters start in year 7, and I can have my younger daughter in reception. So I literally jumped off the sunbed, said to my wife, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the school, and I'm going to do it next September. At which point she just put her earphones back on, just went, oh, God, because she's so used to me and my crazy ideas. So, and of course, from that point, I was just completely obsessed. I tried various means to try and get, the ideas for premises and things. And, looking back, they were sort of a bit ridiculous, really. They were never really going to work. And then I was just so lucky. And this, I don't really believe in luck in business because I think you make your own luck, absolutely. But there are times when you really are just lucky. And I was lucky. I had an architect who I'd worked on another project with phone me up and say, I know you once talked about a school, and I'm not sure if you know, but there's this big building that used to be a school and it's got the right planning use. And it's about 10 minutes from your nurseries. And it's in a big park with loads of woodland overlooking a lake. And it's restricted to educational use. So they can't do anything with it unless somebody opens a school there. And it's not on the open market. And I just went, what? Sorry, repeat that again. And I pretty much flew there. Like I pretty much ran there. I was actually on holiday and I couldn't concentrate on the rest of my holiday, different holiday, lots of holidays, lucky me. So I was on a different holiday and I couldn't concentrate on this holiday with my family because I was so obsessed about wanting to see this building. So I booked the viewing for like practically off the plane. Anyway, saw it, thought, it was a mess, an absolute mess. And it was very daunting because it was so much bigger and older premises than I'd ever taken on before. But I thought, you know what, I can't turn this down. And in our building, we're very lucky we have this huge internal, beautiful kind of triple height space with a massive kind of glass over sort of area. So it's very sort of arboretum type thing. And it was a classic piazza. And my dream within, following Reggio schools and being in Reggio and doing the international study tour about 5 times was always to have this central heart of a school, which would be a piazza, a place of reciprocity, of dialogue, of exchanging ideas. And, and I walked into this central area in this building with this huge light-filled space and 19th century features. And I just thought, wow, if I don't do it here, then where am I going to do it? So that's what we did. And then basically somehow, by hook or by crook, we had a school 15 months later, a primary and secondary school, but my feet did not touch the ground. They did not touch the ground. The whole of the summer last year before we started in September, I think my business manager and I had one person with me full time to get it open. And I think we worked out there was about a period of about 10 weeks straight where we worked dusk till dawn for 10 weeks straight without a single, I barely saw my 4 children. It was like moving house every day for 10 weeks. We were exhausted, as well as, writing schemes of work and curriculum plans and a million other things. And also trying to get my head around it, shaping up my own vision. I knew skeletally what it looked like. I knew where the values were and what the kind of key pillars of what my school was about. But it was only through like talking about it again and again and again and again and how will it practically work that you really end up sort of really shaping the vision. So yeah, that's kind of that's why I got started and that's how I got started. We've now been running for 2 terms. We've got 54 children, which given COVID, I think for a small private and very unique private school is amazing. I think my team and I, so sorry, have really done well. We really have had to market very, very hard. And we're moving in the right direction. It's absolutely always, like I say to the teachers, it's never going to be built. That's not how this works. What we're doing is an action research project live every day. And action research projects don't really come to, a point of saying, yeah, that's it, done. And it certainly don't do that after 2 terms. So, there's loads of ragged ends that we're still tying up and little processes that we're like, oh, we haven't got a process for that yet. And actually, do we want to do that? Is that how we want our school to run? And sometimes it looks exactly like I want it to, and sometimes it looks like the exact opposite. And we have to have a new conversation about, okay, let's just go back to the start. Do you remember when we talked about not wanting to do what other schools do? Let's just remember that, particularly when you're working with people who have been qualified teachers for a very long time and then meshing them with kind of Reggio practitioners who've been in my organisation for many years, and they've come over to sort of blend with these very qualified and technically experienced teachers. It's a very interesting and live place to be.
Wow. That's an incredible story. And so just to go back to that same question that I asked Kath earlier, like I'm really interested in the seed of these stories, and like what was the this moment when you found out about the building? Is that when it sort of became really concrete and you were like, okay, this is actually going to happen? But like going to visit a building, then what happens then? Do you like fill out a form saying I want to fill out a stuff like that? How does this happen?
Okay, so what happens is, I mean, I'm a fairly experienced position, having done about 5, 6. I mean, we've moved our nurseries a couple of times. We're building a huge nursery at the moment. We've got another one coming behind that. So I do have a fair amount of, bit of experience in this world of leases and whatnot. And basically, yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard work. If I saw the building in July. I didn't take on a business manager till literally the 2nd of January, straight after the new year. And when she took over, we were just in the depths of wrangling the details about the lease. So really it sort of goes to solicitors, and you have to actually, in our case, we had to sort of bid to take it on because it's a big building. The rent ramps up, although I believe I negotiated a very good situation with them, but it meant that it delayed some of the sort of heavy end of the rent that would come later when the school was more established. So you've got to prove that you can sustain that. And I think if I hadn't have had my other organisation, we wouldn't, they wouldn't have just trusted me with it for sure. So there's a lot of wrangling with solicitors. There's a lot of chasing solicitors. There's a lot of back and forths. And what was really kind of slightly comical and farcical about us was that we were given the building's actually on a long lease by the DfE itself. So the DfE are actually our landlords, which is quite bizarre. And then the building itself is owned by the local borough council. So we were given this building, but it had a couple of schools in it in the past over the years, sort of a therapy-based school and something else a long time ago. And they basically just sort of handed over, but nobody knew how this building worked. And it had, there were security cameras and CCTV and locking systems and electrical. There were about 7 different electrical circuits. And nobody could tell us how any of it worked. It was just farcical. So we'd phone them and say, have you got any details about, the extremely complicated security system? Nope. Okay. Do you know anything about the plumbing? Nope. Okay, so it was literally just like ridiculous. We had my business manager. She was amazing. She literally just had to unpick this building almost wire by wire, pipe by pipe, and work out how the bloody hell this thing works, so that we could then think about making it safe enough and ready to have a school in. So, at the same time as desperately trying to get all of our pre-registration paperwork together, hire staff. Of course, really actively promoting for children, because we're not the sort of building that really would have worked if we'd started with 5 or 10 kids. I mean, they just would have been like swimming around in a mansion. It just wouldn't have felt right. So for it to feel like a community from day one, we needed a good 30, 40 kids there for it to feel proper. So my aim was to get between 30 and a maximum of 50. And we started with 44, which was brilliant. We're now 54. We have had some children leave where that's another conversation, which I think is an interesting area, actually, and why that is. But yeah, so how you do it is you get somebody who's really, really, really practically minded, totally not like me, to worry about the building while you go away and worry about making the school part. That's what I did.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, and you by the way, you dig a big pit in the ground and you throw all your money in it.
Right. Yeah, well, that's something that, funding is going to be a big thing that I think we'll end up talking about, because obviously that's another, we talked about Ofsted, that's probably the other major thing, isn't it, that where we come up against the reality. So this is it's a private school, isn't it, Atelier?
Yeah, private school, privately funded. We haven't had a helping leg from anybody at all. But as I say, luckily, the only way I could do it was on the back of having worked really hard to build my other organisation up and have that as a bit of a safety net. But we're not very close, but over the next year we'll be in a position where we're wiping our own face, and I might see a salary at some point, which would be lovely.
Right, thank you. So we're almost up for our little slot, but I'm sure we'll talk about some of these ideas later on. One of them being that it occurred to me as you were talking that all four of you, your own kids have gone to the schools that you've created, which I think is a really important thing to recognise. So we'll maybe come back to that later. Just my last question is, why the name Atelier 21? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's so ateliers are creative studio spaces that, it's a French-Italian born word. And in the Reggio Emilia approach within the schools in Reggio Emilia and those that are inspired by that philosophy around the world, they usually have ateliers or an atelier within the school, and that is a creative studio space. So, and it's very much a space to create the new, to look and observe and to theorize about how materials behave, usually quite creative materials, digital materials, natural materials, and really to just be very open to new possibilities. So it's a way of thinking as well as a very physical space within the school. And so the spirit of the atelier is really what I wanted to take from that. So my school is essentially called Atelier 21 because it's a creative education fit for the 21st century.
Okay, and so to you, Lucy, and the new school in Croydon, is it? What was the beginning of your journey at the new school? There was a really interesting piece. I think that you came to wider attention recently. There was this piece in the Guardian, which was lovely. But from a conversation that I had with you, there was some interesting ways in which the journalist had presented the school. So that was how you sort of came to my attention. But what was the beginning of this journey for you, and what were you doing before?
So I was a teacher in former life, and I just was feeling frustrated with sort of shoehorning kids through tests, and honestly just really worrying about a lot of them just going on to secondary and being a really finding themselves in a massive great organization of sort of 1,000 kids when they come from a very small relational 30 kids in the class environment. So I left with the idea that I was going to set up a sort of a charity around the school, almost a way of supporting those kids that were the square pegs, honestly, in round holes, but also the ones that, their skills and interests just lay in different area. At that kind of upper end of primary, the focus just becomes so much just on English and maths. So that's what I did, and I went to the Prince's Trust to get a bit more experience in charities and how they run, and ended up actually staying there working on some of their national projects. And I think that's what changed my direction in a way, because working with young people not in education, training, employment, and NEET at the kind of upper age bracket, 14 to 16-year-olds. I think it was really clear to me, how hard it is to re-engage them, how hard it is to find something that they're really interested in, because they've been outside of a system for so long. And so I actually just thought, I don't want, that idea is kind of past now. And so I actually had a complete career change, went back to university, retrained as a nutritional therapist, and actually did a little bit like Kath, but did a master's in similar to a master's in evolutionary biology. It's actually called psychoneuroimmunology, if you want the longer version. Yeah. But I think what that really helped me to see is the kind of what we come into the world expecting in terms of our physiology, in terms of our attachment, in terms of that relational aspect. And that care and nurture that shapes brains and literally shapes who we are. So from that, I kind of went into clinic work, thinking like working with kind of children and younger children, much younger children, and parents. And but actually I wasn't a dietitian, so I didn't work inside the NHS. And then in private practice, it was great, but it still wasn't quite where I was wanting to work. But then I had my own kids and thought, and what do I do now? Like, do I put them back into the system that I left, that I wasn't happy teaching in? So I looked around for ages at different nurseries, like Montessori type ones, more like Hayley's Reggio style. And actually, what really struck me the most was behaviour policies, and that, I think, led me down the homeschooling route, because I thought, actually, you know, there's some amazing settings doing brilliant things, but for me, having a behaviour policy that just seems so counter to young child's development, you know, rain clouds because you can't sit with your legs crossed at 3 or 4, you know, things like that, that just, it didn't work in my head. And from kind of, the more relational side, I suppose. And so I thought, actually, is there a school system that I would put them into? What would I be happy with? And also in terms of kind of more experiential style learning. So I spent a number of years, whilst my oldest was young, researching different school systems through Reggio, Steiner, Montessori. And when I got to democratic education, that's when I really thought, this speaks to me in terms of agency of young people and how I want to relate to my children, and how I want to work collaboratively with them as an adult, but actually with understanding their needs and what they're communicating to me, and having, you know, supporting their autonomy in that. And I think, you know, democratic settings look so vastly different. It's really, really hard to make kind of general comparisons. But the two kind of main facets of a democratic setting are usually young people having much more of a voice in how the school is run and the structures, and more of a choice in their education. But then, you know, all alternative settings naturally at the moment in the UK end up being fee paying. And I thought, you know, that's not what I wanted at the time. And what struck me was that there was so many of these amazing settings doing amazing things, and yet so little outcomes in terms of something that could challenge the mainstream, that could say, you know what, this could work as well. Not necessarily instead of, you know, I think the element of what we call choice in the UK isn't really choice in terms of education. So I thought, well, actually, in order to challenge that, and in order to say, okay, there are alternatives that do work for all young people, I had to create a setting that included all young people, and therefore it had to be non-fee paying. So there came my first hurdle, because obviously in the UK, it's 2 school systems, one the parents pay and one the state pays, and obviously if the state pays, you do it the state's way. So I thought there's got to be that middle ground. You know, what if it was what I kept asking myself, what if there was a different way? What if there was a way of financing a school? And so I spent a long time looking at social impact bonds, commissioning models, and things like that. And actually, there is a school that has been commissioned like that, and in the UK, and there are a number of projects similar, not schools, but other mechanisms, financing models. And so that's where I started, actually. So, you know, like Hayley, the building was the first issue. I spent probably 2.5 years trying to find a suitable building. And then again, like Hayley, we just got really lucky. And, you know, there was a fabulous little project, a bit like Kath's, using a couple of rooms in an old school. And the school had been a school by a convent. And the sister was a bit burned, I think, by that experience. I hope my internet is going to be stable. It just told me it wasn't going to be, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's hanging in there, just.
It's hanging in there, good. So that's where. So I went to speak to her, and I told her all about my idea for a school. And bizarrely, this little project, well, probably not bizarrely, but this project that was there had gifted the sister Paulo Freire's book, and it was sat on her desk when I went in, and I thought, that's a sign.
That pedagogy of the oppressed.
Yeah, sitting on, she's nearly 80. This Catholic nun, and it was just sat on her desk. And I thought, right, here we go. I'm going to tell you everything about this school. And yeah, she was like, okay. She was going to turn it into a business centre, and she agreed. And you know, I said, currently we've got a year's worth of funding. And she said, okay, we'll do it on a rolling lease. so that's what we took it based on. But yeah.
Amazing. I think we have a question from Hayley.
Yeah, I mean, Lucy, I've always just been, I mean, we met early on when you were about to, you were kind of doing, pitching to parents, and we pitched up to see what it looked like. You were a few months ahead of us, blah, 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 and it was a pleasure. But, I don't know how you cope with the pressure of the funding, of finding the funding. I mean, how are you doing that? And how, not just how are you physically getting the money in, but how are you going about like that constant fear of, will we have enough? And then the impact on what that would do if you didn't, and all those families that, would obviously be naturally disappointed, and teachers with wages. That fascinates me. I mean, it's incredible, and it's really brave, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant what you're doing. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that is a massive stress. Everything about this is very stressful, and wonderful and crazy all at the same time. But yeah, I mean, we've just been very open with everybody from the beginning. All of our young people and parents and teachers all knew the funding situation, and accept the place based on knowing that is the case. We have had a number of people turn down an offer of a place because of that reason, because they're making a choice of moving their child to a different school. But we're hugely oversubscribed, like hugely. We have a waiting list of over 150 kids. And I think that is interesting in itself. The other thing that's probably interesting is that nearly 70% of our current intake were formerly homeschooled. And I think homeschoolers obviously then have that as backup. So they are actually then okay to say, okay, yeah, I'll try that for a year. And if a year is all I get, then a year is all I get. So I think that does help. But yeah, it's challenging, and it makes it really hard, I think, for staff as well. But, all of our staff were willing to take a risk again on something that gave them an opportunity to reprofessionalize themselves. I think, remember why they went into teaching, and hats off to them. They probably, their workload is exactly the same or worse because it's a brand new school. But yeah, and I think then, I suppose you were just asking about the actual funder. Again, we just got really, really lucky. We've just found somebody who just likes the idea of challenging the fact that schools currently are only funded in two ways, parents or the state, because of the potential to open up education by doing so. But yeah, I mean, we've got our second year's funding. And we've got 3 fundraisers who I work with, one of whom works in public sector. His whole career is in outcome commissioning models. We work closely with all of our LAs that are near us, Department of Culture and Media, what's the other one? Sport. And, Big Issue Invest and some of the bigger outcome funders. So we'll see. Watch this space.
Yeah, thank you. So could you just explain a little bit? So you mainly got this, there are philanthropic organisations or individuals who've donated mainly to this school, and it's interesting that there's a lot of money out there in the world, and there are a lot of philanthropic individuals and organisations who are interested in doing things differently. And it's fascinating that you've gone down this route, because most people wouldn't think that was even an option. And this idea that you just mentioned, social outcomes commissioning, is something that was certainly news to me. And I understand that this is how this other school up in Doncaster operates. Please, can you explain a little bit about what that is and how it works?
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of they're on a different blended funding model at the moment, and they've gone from an independent school to an AP actually at the moment. But yeah, so basically it's just a triangle. So the local authority is interested in a particular project, whether it's around mental health, or is it around education, and interested in outcomes related to that. So and then you just put a rate card to those outcomes. So for example, school, A to C GCSE results, it might be attendance figures, it might be progress against personal learning plan. And, you know, if you hit the outcomes that are pre-agreed at the beginning of the contract, the local authority will pay, but the initial investment comes from an investor. So that's the third spoke of the triangle, I suppose, that says, okay, I'll do the due diligence. I'm happy to take the risk on this project, organisation, whatever. And if they hit the outcomes that the local authority want, the local authority pay us back. So there's no risk for the local authority in it. You know, they get the commissioned model that they want. It might be that they're interested in a particular cohort, you know, at-risk young people. You know, we've got 31% free school meals. Our additional needs probably are nearing 30%. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe we'll come back to the funding thing later on, but just in the last couple of minutes in your section, can I ask you about the democratic element of the new school? Why is it that you were particularly interested in a democratic model? And can you give listeners a flavour of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So one way that we work to challenge the system, you know, what's really interesting for me is a bit like Reggio's done in Italy. You know, what are the conditions that you can create that allow a system to sit alongside a mainstream system and operate effectively? You know, and one thing that we need in the UK to do that is a way of holding schools accountable to some sort of outcomes framework. Currently, it's standardized test outcome framework, particularly. So we've built an alternative outcomes framework. So we look at a broader range of measures. So self-efficacy, self-esteem, educational engagement, life satisfaction. Obviously, academic attainment is implicit within that as well, but it's not the main steer of the measurement. And I think that is kind of a crucial difference. And the overall outcome that we're looking for is young people having a strong sense of personal agency when they leave our school. And in order to have agency, you need to have a voice. And so the way we operate is through a sociocratic model, sociocracy. So we work in circles. So operationally, we have our, you know, the operational bits of the school, assessment, curriculum, you know, whatever they are, and staff opt into whichever areas that they're interested in. But in not opting into a particular circle, you're accepting that people will make decisions for you within that area. So if you want decisions not made for you, or you're happy that, you know, you join it, or you're happy that someone represents your voice in that circle. And that's the same for young people. So teachers represent their class voice in our circles. And we also have young people circles. So they have their own say in areas of the school that they're particularly interested in. And we also have whole school time to connect, you know, where we can bring things that are important for everybody to have a say.
Really interesting. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions for Lucy before we move on?
I don't know if it's necessarily a question for now, but one of our biggest challenges, and we're quite similar to the model that Lucy's put together. A lot of the things she's saying, you know, resonate with how things work at my school as well. But the big difference is that her school is free. And that, you know, that is a big, big difference. It changes absolutely everything. And one of the it's almost like a slight danger. I'm not really sure I want to go here, but then I sort of can't help myself at the same time. Our biggest challenge at the moment is finding the balance and finding the balance with working with families with children where school hasn't worked out very well before, and where they don't necessarily haven't thrived within the mainstream system, whether that be private or state funded, and children with, you know, specific needs. And that has become a huge part of our narrative. It's become part of our day-to-day dialogue. And we are taking quite a radically unpopular route to how we manage it, which means we are going to become extremely selective about it. We have already begun to do so. And it's at the point where, I'm having parents crying down the phone because I know that my school can't give their child what they need. They think it can. I know it can't. And it's really challenging because on the one side of things, I absolutely know what we're doing is the right decision. And I know that it's protecting my community. It's also protecting those children from a breakdown in placement. But then on the other side of things, we have ex-parents where I've done my learning from who are sort of, we're getting bashed, we're getting battered from both sides. We're getting battered if we don't take children, and then saying that we're not inclusive and all the rest of it, which we absolutely are. We have we have lots of children with different needs, light to moderate needs in our school, who are absolutely thriving beyond the expectations of their parents, some of which weren't in school for 2 years, and you just cannot believe the transformation, and nor can we. So we are absolutely inclusive, but you have to think of the vision. And I just want to know how Lucy's finding that, because I would imagine what I've learned is that the homeschool community is largely actually made up of children who are homeschooled not through choice. And therefore, how is that faring, and how's that affecting the development of her vision? And is it being disruptive? Because then sometimes it can work beautifully and sometimes it can be very disruptive.
Yeah, I totally hear you, Hayley. It is very disruptive. We have hugely challenging children with real levels of trauma. We have a lot of child protection cases. We have young people that really struggle to engage in any form of learning because of that. And but that, whilst that takes up a huge amount of time, it takes up a lot of resource, it's also part of the relational model that we're building, because it's, for us, our model won't work unless we can show that actually it works for all children.
Yeah.
Because we want it to be an alternative that can sit in the system. So for us, it's about how we enable those young people and how we connect with them. And yes, our pastoral support resource is vital, but it's also such a massive learning curve for all of the young people, because you could go down that route and say, okay, this disruption disrupts everyone's learning, or you can go down the route and say, how young people learn to accept everyone's strengths and weaknesses and adjust and adapt themselves and have their strengths and weaknesses recognized and adapted and adapt in response. That amount of learning is so huge. And that's what we're seeing more and more, is that ability to empathize and recognize and understand difference. And so, yeah, it's all in everything that you said, but I think it is actually part of the vision for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the vision, for us too. And I have to say that I was quite scared that, it sounds very bit clunky, but I've been warned so much that if you start a progressive school, you will have a lot of applications from children where school hasn't worked out very well, and you'll have to be very aware of that. And lots of people gave me lots of whispered conversations about it. You must be careful, and I was sort of like, well, you know what, we're all about love and inclusivity and blah blah blah. So started off with the absolute best intentions, and actually but also a bit kind of frightened about what people had said. And I have to say, I didn't see it in myself, but the biggest joy that I've had is being a really important part of the huge change in childhood for some of the people in our community. I mean, literally, it's changed their childhood. And that has brought me so much joy, and it's really, really tough because I want to say yes to everyone.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Were you going to add something there, Kate?
Just because yesterday that was our that was our little circle time. So we have 40 children, all in different ages, and something had shifted this session. We had some relational issues going on with kids, and there was some meanness going around. And I had my staff meeting the night before, and we all sat and said, yeah, it doesn't feel the same. And I said, then we stop right now, because everything that we want to do, kind of, you know, that Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you said and they will forget what you did, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. And I said, the hive is there so that everybody who comes feels safe, and that they feel welcome, and that they feel that they have a space to express themselves and become whoever it is they feel like they want to be at the moment. And that's not happening now. Something's changed. So we need to go back to that. That has to be the most important thing, is how everybody feels when we're together. And so sometimes the learning outcomes, the knowledge that's being collected, has to take a back seat so that those relationships can grow. And it's really hard to find the balance. So it's fascinating for me to sit and listen to you two saying, this is the challenge. This is where the challenge is. The challenge is not necessarily where I thought it was going to be. It's in these relationships, and it's in the balance between how we learn and what we prioritize and how we prioritize it. And yeah, it's fascinating. I'm glad that we're all here together having this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, right. I'm really quite in awe of all of you. I feel very privileged to be able to have this conversation with you and to bring your stories to wider attention. Okay, so let's come on to Kate, and then we'll maybe pick up this conversation again in a moment. So if anyone has listened to the previous episode of the podcast with Kate, we had a long conversation about the journey that pretty much led you up to the point where you were about to open the hive, like the following week or something. But if people haven't heard that, can you just give a very brief version of that story about why it is that you came to be in the Dominican Republic, why it is that you set up this school, or this alternative to school there? And then I'd really like to hear about what's been happening since then and what day-to-day life is like in the hive.
Sure. So I've been interested in education. I've been a teacher for about 20 years, started off as a languages teacher. Then I got into learning skills and all of those kind of whole child approaches to learning, and spent a long time working with James. And so for a while I was mostly a year 7 teacher, and I taught French, Spanish, PE, English, and a dash of humanities. And I was running around from like history to PE to French to Spanish and thinking, this is ridiculous. How can anybody function like this? How can the children function like this? Why is school like this? One day, when I have more time, I am going to redesign school, because this is ridiculous and it doesn't work. And it was just kind of in the back of my head, ticking round for probably 10 or 15 years. You know, that, like James said, if I ruled the world, if I was in charge, what would I do differently? What if, the same as the rest of you, what if it wasn't like this? What if all these things that are in my way were not in my way anymore? What if all the rocks were out of my pockets and I could do whatever I wanted? And I never intended to open a school. My intention, I basically bought myself out of my life about just over a year ago. I was working with James. We'd set up a consultancy. I was traveling. Things were going really well. I was working with fascinating educators, and it was taking me away from my child. And it was taking me away from my home, and it was taking me away from the things that I wanted to be doing. And I thought, this isn't working. This model that I've designed for myself isn't how I want it to be. What do I want my life to look like? What do I want my life to feel like? What do I want my relationship with my daughter to be like, and my son? So I sold everything and I headed off on one big learning journey. And because I've work democratically with my daughter, I wanted to go to Goa, and I wanted to go and visit one of Sagatra Mitra's soul-inspired schools that's run by a lady called Shilpa Mehta in Goa. And my daughter wanted to go to New York. And because we've always made our family decisions together, we went to New York, and I still haven't made it to Goa. And after New York, we came to Dominican Republic, and I came here to meet somebody else who was setting up a world school. I wanted to understand the alternatives to education because I'd always been in mainstream, raised mainstream, taught mainstream. Mainstream was all I knew until I discovered that there were all of these alternative ways to do education, but I didn't know them well enough and I hadn't experienced them. So I set off on this journey to experience alternative models of education and to meet the people who open these schools and the parents who send their kids there to find out if that's what I wanted for my family. And then COVID came and the school I came to visit shut down and everybody flew back home because it was a pop-up world school. It was a temporary school. It was going to travel. And I was stuck here. And it was a rather lovely place to get stuck, so I wasn't worried. And I made a community here of other parents with children. And we got to talking. They were talking about what can we do? How can we educate our children in what's going to probably be a year of them being out of school? And I was like, shut up, Kate, don't say anything, don't say a word, don't tell them that what you've been doing for the last 5 years is opening schools. Because I had been also on the side, I opened an organization that does these little pop-up schools for refugees or for excluded communities. And I'd been doing that for a while. And I thought, you don't want to do this here. This is about you. This is about your learning. This is your time. You've sold your house. You've bought yourself all this free time to do yoga and become expansive and study Ayurveda. Shut up, woman. And of course, I didn't shut up. There were 11 children when we started. We started in a yoga shala in a local hotel. And then word went round and it got bigger. And even though it was in a pandemic and we had to be really careful and everything was, quite difficult, it grew. And then again, it was the building. Somebody said, there's that building over there that's just would be perfect. And I went and I walked in and it just spoke to me. And so I bought it just like that. And it started. And now we opened in January. So it was a very steep learning curve because I didn't have a business manager and I didn't speak Spanish very well when I got here. And it's grown organically with this community, and we've gradually included more communities into our cohort. We've got 40 children now. And that's where it started, really. I suppose what happened, I'd gone on this journey to meet other people, to find the thing that I was looking for. And being made to sit still in the pandemic and not be allowed to move made me realize that I could spend the rest of forever traveling around the world looking for all of these people. What if I stick my flag in the ground? What if I'm brave? What if I send up the bat signal and see who comes? And I didn't really believe that anybody would come. But I thought, why not, Kate? If not now, when? Like, why not? It's in the middle of a pandemic, just do it, be brave. So I did, and people are coming, and the most fascinating people are coming, and it's really, really lovely. And I'm learning a huge amount about, everything about running a business, about opening a school, about models for education, about assessment tools, about people and about what they need, about finding balance, because it's really hard. And it's brought me to here, and it's brought me to conversations with you three. And I'm going to learn a huge amount from being here, talking to you. That's where it started. It wasn't deliberate. It was a very accidental. That idea that had been in the back of my head for a long time just came to the front. It was time. It was time for it to be born. It was time for me to be brave. It was time for me to nail my colours to the mast. It was time. And so it's here. And I suppose that's quite a lovely thing for me to be listening to these other women saying it was an idea that needed to be born. And we've all kind of used that analogy a little bit. We've talked about our children and we've talked about building the world that we want for them. And I always used to be a bit embarrassed about those romantic notions that I had. I felt that they were romantic and naive and I wasn't allowed to express them. And so now being able to express them alongside other women who not only brave enough to say it, but brave enough to do it, it's quite a big thing.
It's quite cool, isn't it?
It is quite cool. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. And the fact that you're all women has not escaped my attention. And maybe we'll look at that. I mean, I know that this is a small sample size. I've studied social science. I know that, you know, you can't draw any firm conclusions from that. But there is an interesting aspect there, which I think might be interesting to explore. But just let's stay on the Hive for a moment. So I think because the other 3 schools are based in the UK, I think there are more sort of restrictions around what you can and can't do. You know, we've talked about Ofsted and following the national curriculum, for example. And I think that the Hive is probably a bit more far out. Maybe the Soweni was like halfway to the Hive, it seems. But so you described the Hive not as an alternative school, but an alternative to school. Can you explain what that is and what happens with the kids on a day-to-day basis?
And that's kind of happened naturally as well. So the website is thehive.school, and it was called the Hive School in the beginning. But I think that there's more negativity attached to the word school than I realised. And there's the unschooling movement and the deschooling movement, and there's something about being schooled. And so we're moving away from the name school. But you also need to use the word school because that's the word that everybody uses when you think about a collection of children in the same place at the same time learning. That's a school. So we're an alternative to school. It's a place where we can come and all be in collectivity learning together. But it's not a school. So there are not desks and there are not teachers at the front, and all of those things that feel like school that we don't like aren't there. Hayley.
Oh, I just wanted to. Can you just explain then? You know, if you're not a school in the way that we all understand the word, you know, what are you? Are you a homeschool group? Are you? How many hours are children coming for? Are they coming 5 days a week? Are they coming flexibly? I just want to get the shape of what the Hive is, really.
Well, that's the thing. It's in development, so it's taking its own form at the moment. It's a hive, really, rather than a school. So the children come from 8:30 in the morning and they stay till 2:30, and then and then from 2:30 till 4ish, they do clubs. So it's 8:30 till 4. We have snack time, we have lunch time, we have learning time, we have adults, we have children, we have dogs. We have fruit trees. We have lots of the things that you would expect to find in a learning with a chicken coop. Lots of the things that you would expect to find in a school. Like if you dropped in from another planet, you would go, okay, the closest thing that I know this looks like is a school, but it's not, because it's democratic, because the children have agency, because we don't have a predefined curriculum. We design it as we go along, depending on who we have and what we want to learn and what our needs are that we need to meet. So there's so much about it that is not school, that it can't really be a school. But I haven't yet found an alternative description that I'm comfortable with. So it's the Hive.
And do you have a regulating, because you can't, I mean, you'll be aware that you can't start a school like this in the UK in the way you're describing, not a full-time school. You can do what Kath is doing, absolutely. You can register as basically under the childminding section of the regulation, and then you can go and do things in a really self-directed way, and that's fantastic for a limited amount of hours a week. But you can't run a full school in the way you're describing.
No.
So do you have is there somebody governing how and what you do, or is it literally as beautiful as you can just go for it and do what you like, which is how we'd all love to do it?
So we went and had a lovely chat with the mayor about what we were doing beforehand, and it's so officially we are a centro educativo. We're an educational centre, and we're going to be registered as a tourism company as well, because we bring so many families into the region. So it's a real blend of many different things, almost like a summer camp, but it runs all year.
Yeah.
or higher education or adult ed, but it's during the day. And it's kind of mixing together all of those solutions that go around the outside of school. So for a community, when school is broken down, when you've either had to leave as a child or you've been spat out at the far end of it, underprepared and undereducated, all of those other things that pop up around the outside to meet those needs. That's kind of how we work, but we do it during the day, which is why I'm calling it an alternative to school, because it's not a school. It's all of those alternative solutions that do work for people and also work for children who can stay in mainstream. They just seem to work better. Like the alternatives to mainstream education appear to work better for everybody. So I'm still not sure why we haven't tipped over to using those methodologies in mainstream more.
This is a huge, apologies if I'm stealing other people's airtime, do just put me in my place. This is a huge, big deal for me. I am becoming very increasingly frustrated that what we should be talking about is, I almost want to redefine this word progressive, because progressive is not progressive. Progressive is just it's just banded in with alternative for children. It's like, for me, our school is trying to present school. We call our school a revolutionary response to school, not a revolutionary approach to school. And so it's a response to what I feel is the issue of wanting to educate in a very holistic way, where the learning experience is joyful, but it's also connected, relevant, meaningful, and purposeful to other learning. Because if you think about the experience of a child from 5 years old up to 18, going to school every day and literally going from maths, and now we're doing Judaism, and now we're doing mountains, and now we're doing photosynthesis, and now we're back to Judaism, and now we're doing Spanish, and now we're doing... it's kind of mental when you think about putting them through that for 18, 13 years. And then we wonder why they're the most demotivated about learning they've ever been at the end of that, when they started at 4 or 5 years old, the most motivated, and with the most sense of curiosity and creativity and agency and ideas and theory making and just all this brilliant stuff. And then by the end of it, like my son, who's going to get amazing results, lucky him, he's got the sort of natural ability, came to me at 16 years old and said, 15 years old, sorry, and said, I'm literally done. I cannot take any more, even though it's at the best school, a very, very privileged, lovely, lovely schools. Very lucky. And, came to 15 and said, genuinely, Mum, at 16, can I leave school? I don't want to go into any sort of higher education. Of which I coughed and said, well, after 100 grand of investment, absolutely not. And sort of, firmly put him in his place and said, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But, I haven't worked my life off to pay for you to then leave at 16. However, the bigger question is not, it's not about whether he leaves. It's why does he want to? Why does he want to, at 16, on the very, on that lovely sweet spot age of adulthood, say, I don't want to learn anymore at that point? I mean, that is frightening. So I am going somewhere with this. My point is that, developing alternatives in education, progression in education, which is what it should be, given it's called, we call them progressive schools. I am really rocked and deeply sort of discombobulated by the cold hard truth that progressive and alternative schools are now seen as just places for children where it doesn't work out in mainstream. Because actually there is a huge amount of people, and our community is full of them, where they're not coming to us because their children, it isn't working out. They're coming to us because they really believe in the idea of developing children's habits of mind, their characters, their personal responsibility, their sense of agency, and all the juicy stuff we all believe in. They really see that in living in a 21st century adult world, you absolutely carve out a better life that is lived well by having those in your toolkit. And they are not up front and centre in the mainstream sector or in the private school sector, where it is high stakes testing and competitive. Yes, they might get really good GCSEs, but what I say to parents is, don't be worrying about whether they're going to go to university. Worry about how boring they'll be at the interview. Because in a future where higher education is so accessible, they're going to, the playing field is bigger than ever. They're competing against more people than ever that will have, higher education. They'll have A-levels, they'll have degrees. You can do a degree in fish and chips these days. So really, what are, future companies, future employees, people are going to give these young people their first step on the ladder to their future. What are they looking for? Well, they're looking for somebody who's going to be different, who's going to have character, who's going to have passion, who's developed their own stuff. My son taught himself how to trade in the stock market at 14 from his bedroom for 6 months, had no idea what he was doing, and then just turned around one day and said, by the way, I've taught myself to do this. Can I open an account in your name as an alias? And I said, yes. And within 3 months, I was asking to invest. He was making so much money. It is absolutely ridiculous. The school, have got no idea that he's got these skills. And I all I'm getting to is I'm frustrated because I don't want the conversation to always be about, alternatives being for the children where it's not working. We should be providing the alternative because it's the damn right thing to do for everybody.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Well said.
Yeah,
let's go.
I agree. And the only way I knew how to do it was to deliberately try to bring 3 very different types of. So a lot of the work I've been doing is bringing communities who wouldn't normally meet and get along well together, to learn together, to kind of create those relationships. So refugees and host communities, homeless people and where they live, and getting them to work together so that those relationships are built. And that kind of gave me the idea, because it's hard. That work is really challenging, and the challenge isn't where you think it's going to be always, because you think, good-hearted people are coming in to work with people who are having a hard time, and they're going to, and it's culturally, working with people who are culturally so different from you is very challenging. So, well, how are we going to get over this on a grand enough scale so that we can understand one another better? Because it all seems to boil down to me that we don't understand ourselves well enough, and we don't understand each other well enough, and we don't understand what we can do to make a difference in our own lives. So I want to build a school that teaches children how to do that with children who are very different from they are. So we have young children, we have children who are Dominican, who are here, who live up in the Loma. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they haven't had education before. A lot of them are functionally illiterate. And then we have these world schooling children whose parents can afford to sail around the world on a yacht year after year, dipping in and out of the green school in Bali or the wherever. So we've got the most privileged and the least privileged children on the planet together in the same place at the same time, with kids like mine who sit somewhere in the middle, and they're working on the sustainable development. All of the curriculum is built around the sustainable development goals. So they are learning what they care about, and they are learning how to respond to what they care about, and they are learning how to have either a effective response or an ineffective response, and why. So when they get to that interview when they're 18, they know what they're passionate about. They can talk from experience. They can articulate everything about why something is important, from what it feels like to be the person who's providing the solution to what it feels like to be the person receiving the solution, because they understand both ends of that entire journey. Like, we don't have time to keep tinkering around the outside of this. Like, as Greta Thunberg says, like, your house is on fire. Why aren't you doing anything? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of want the Hive to be a place where you can come and roll your sleeves up and really get to the root of what the big issues are in the world, and have a go at fixing them, and develop a toolkit for living your life in a way that means that you get to be the difference, that you get to recognize what's not quite right in your own life and do something about it. And you can recognize where other people are struggling and do something about it, and where the planet needs support and do something about it. And I'm getting quite loud, so obviously I'm very passionate about this.
No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
But that's what it's for. That's what that's its why.
think it's safe to say that we've slipped into the wider conversation, which is great. So let's go to Kath and then Lucy.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I can I just say what a privilege it is to be on this podcast right now, because this is the conversation that I just really feel very happy to be a part of. I've been thinking a lot about exactly this and the kind of outcome-oriented, high-stakes testing that we have going on in the UK, and how something like Soweni could happen if we had that kind of trickle-down approach from whatever outcome it is that education is supposed to give us. So if we took high-stakes testing out of the equation completely, and this was my big question, what would it look like then to come out of education? What would we have? And I've been thinking about Rethinking Assessment folk have been producing reports and things, and they've been looking at the Mastery Transcript Consortium and the IB Learner Profile, which talks about sort of dispositions. And I know Guy Claxton talks about this and his learning river of knowledge on top, and then dispositions of the kind of big fish that run along the bottom of the river, the kind of stuff that it's really the really meaty bits that we see in children developing over time. And I'm thinking, how can we capture that? How can we capture that journey from birth to 18 and beyond? Like that's your child's education kind of in a beautiful, some kind of beautiful fractal flower or something like that. And I've been thinking very much about my son. He is an incredibly spirited character. He loves performing, and he's just learned how to rap really, really fast, which is incredible. He would not fit in mainstream at all. And I know I could just see it from when he was 2, I just knew he was going to be squashed. And if I had something at that point where I could just put all of the little bits that he did that really showed who he was from a toddler, and the passionate things about, Naomi Fisher was talking on Fabienne's wonderful podcast, Flourishing Education, earlier about, children at 2 and love diggers. They're really passionate about diggers, and everything's a digger, and they somehow manage to alter their environment so that diggers are suddenly their curtains and their bedspreads, and they're everywhere. And then at school, they're suddenly told, "Oof, okay, that's not actually important. What's important is this." And I'm thinking exactly what happened to me as a child as well. I went into school. He said, "What's your name?" And I said, and at that point I was, "Katie, my name's Katie." And they said, "No, it's not, it's Catherine." And I was just like, oh, wow, okay, there goes my identity, my voice, my agency, everything.
Wow.
In one fell swoop. Like, how do we keep that? How do we keep that? And how do we make sure that education's outcomes hold on to that? And I have a theory that some kind of education journey, and we've got the capability now, we've got AI, all sorts of stuff that we can throw at this. Some kind of education journey that really captures the things that children are passionate about when they're young, and watches their project cycles as they ebb and flow, and see where their flashes of inspiration are, where the realism's kicked in and they've kind of gone into a bit of a struggle pit, where they've somehow found another way out that might look different to what they were doing before, but that really shows those kind of like, and I'm drawing, you can't see on a podcast, but I'm drawing a nice little sort of flowing line, that we can see all of these project cycles kind of growing out from this child, and see where their passions are going, and see what kind of a person they are. And you could also have a snapshot of something like this that's a really kind of like surface level snapshot that could be anonymized. So we get rid of all of this sort of unconscious biases and things like that, so that universities and employers and stuff could see something like this as being a beautiful flowering fractal that you can go zip into and dive into and look at the photos and videos if you want to, but not if you don't want to. And that could be an amazing way of capturing a child's learning journey. And there are challenges in that, obviously, because we have children from all different backgrounds. And as Kate was saying, all different, they have such different and vastly different experiences. It doesn't mean that any of those experiences are any less valid on this journey. They all add their grit and resilience and all of the things that mainstream like bandying around as things that you want to develop in a child. But they could be like spun so beautifully to show that child as they really are. So when they come out of education, actually, they've got a fabulous portrait of who they are and of what they can do and of where their deep passions from way back have kind of exploded and explored. And I think that could be really special.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is an ongoing conversation that I've been having with Kate and her colleagues at the Hive to develop something that captures learning in the sorts of way that you're describing. Lucy, would you like to come in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating conversation, and I think this agree with everything that everyone's saying. I think what's really so challenging for us in the UK is, as Hayley said, that model is near on impossible to create within a school right now. And I think what I would love to see is actually the influencers coming together, the big business that can say, you know what, we don't want grades on our application form anymore. I want to see what you're describing, Kath. It's the EYs, it's the PwC, they're already grades blind, fine, but it's about them asking for something different. And it's also then it enables parents to say, okay, I can see that actually my young people don't need to have 10 GCSEs and 4 A levels all at A star, and therefore I don't need to push for that for them, that I can do what feels better for my kids, and because I think people power and business power influences policy.
I was going to say there's still a huge amount of nervousness with parents. I think whenever you have a conversation around the dinner table, often comes down to education. I felt squashed at school. My spirit got broken. I didn't get to be who I wanted to be. I know I'm doing the same thing to my children. I wish it could be different. What it can be, yes, but if we go down that road, what if they can't get into university? What if they can't get a job? What if they don't get there's so much attached to getting the exams, because we've been told our whole lives that these exams are the keys to the doors that we need to open to get to the future that we want to have. And if we don't have these keys, our children will forever be stuck on the wrong side of these doors of opportunity. And no parent, it's very, very difficult. Some parents do. Some parents don't believe it, and they do take their children out and they do homeschool them. But there's not enough information out there, I think, for parents to understand that, yes, your children can get into university without straight A levels. And they can travel the world and get interesting jobs and do all these things without straight GCSEs and A levels. And there's not enough information available for families to make these decisions at the moment. There's not enough option available for families. And so I hope that this conversation leads to other people hearing it and going, well, I'm doing something different and I'm doing something different. And we're a university that allow children in who've been homeschooled. And we're a university and this is our entrance policy. And we're employers and we encourage children from these kinds of backgrounds to come to us. Because I think if parents were more confident that those doors would remain open for their children, then they would make braver choices for their education. And then we would have that parent push and the employment push that we need to knock over the system that we currently have.
Absolutely.
I think also, I completely agree with what you're saying to a certain extent, Kate, but I hear that familiar slight narrative in what you're saying that gets my back up a bit, because it starts to sound like, we're always talking about the alternative for those who can't. So those who can't, this is the alternative. But I think the conversation should be more about this is the alternative because it's better. And also, it's not a conversation about whether they should or shouldn't get grades. I don't think grades should be the big part of the conversation. At our school, my kind of ethos and what I tell my parents is very simple. Absolutely, they need to get the GCSEs. Absolutely, we want them to get their personal best. Some children will do 5, some children will do 10 in our school, and it'll be an individual conversation with those families about what's appropriate. We're not interested in where we sit on league tables. We're interested in personal best for those individuals to open the next door. That is the reality of life as we know it at the minute. However, we do not need to make a child's educational experience all about that for 13 years. And that's the thing that I think is so important, because actually what we need to, the conversation is much more nuanced and sensitive than just whether exams matter. Because if we just took exams away, we'd have a huge issue, and it would be a problem. And it's not a problem that we've even begun to want to try and sort of work out how we would get around that. So I don't think that's the issue. I think what we need to do is be a bit more sophisticated as a kind of a larger conversation about what is success for your child. And that's what I want to point my parents towards. Really think about, what does a successful life mean to you for your child? And let's then link that with these values around a more holistic education, a more connected education, and how they play together. For example, what does it look like to be somebody who's living their best life? Well, to me, a successful life is managing at some stage to have a successful relationship where you might get a partner for life, a soulmate, and make a great life and have that best friend, that best buddy, that fantastic lover for the rest of your life. That's what enriches us as adults. Having a good relationship with your parents is very, very key. Maintaining and making friends and having lifelong friends that will be there with you, for the rest of your life. Being a good parent yourself, which we can all so easily get wrong, and takes huge amounts of education. It's a huge educational journey right from the second they're born, because we have to undo all the crap that we were sort of put through, really, well-intended crap, but a lot of it was crap. So, and at the end of the day, this is where, for me, curiosity has got to be at the heart of what we're trying to foster. We have to foster a desire in children to want to know more. And I don't mean more things, and I don't mean to do more things. What I mean is that we need to find the little tuning, the tuning knob in their brain, where when something goes wrong in a relationship, i.e. their friend, and it breaks down and there's an argument, instead of saying, having an emotional reaction and just teaching children how to self-regulate emotions, why not tell them and teach them to twist the dial to the curious place? If we go from emotional reaction to curious reaction, then we start getting interested in how we are responding, how the other person is responding. Then we start to tolerate other people's points of view. Then we start to ask internal questions. Why is my relationship with my mother breaking down? Why is my relationship with my brother not as good as it once was? Why is my best friend, seemingly treating me in a way that I feel uncomfortable about? You go from a curious and inquiring point of view, you're going to build relationships better with everybody, with your boss, with your employees, with your work colleagues, with your parents, with your children, and so on and so on. And you will take away I think we will solve what I think is a real problem of the snowflake generation, where parenting has just become about not letting our children feel the feelings, because, oh my God, if they feel the feelings, then, it'll just be horrible and we've got to protect them from the feelings. No, we haven't. We've got to get them to feel the feelings so they know how to get through the feelings. And to me, it all comes down to developing a curious and interested and inquiring mind that will seek to understand not just things and stuff and how to do things, but how to make relationships work. And that's what's really missing for me in education, really missing.
And it's really interesting how, although each of your 4 stories are different, there are such huge areas of overlap in your vision for what education should be about this, like engaging with emotions and self-regulation, and the word relational has come up more than once. And I know that's a big part of your work as well, Kate. Kath, you were going to come in.
Yeah, I've just had a couple of things actually. We've been talking on the Rethinking Mighty Network. Give it a little plug there. And I think wonderful Sarah Fraser said how great it would be if we had a question such as, rather than sort of, what do you do for a living? How do you educate your children? Being as a kind of question to have as an open one. That shifts. That's a kind of like what if kind of question. And absolutely, completely agree with everything you're saying, Kate and Hayley. The story of success that we have, the sort of work hard to get good grades equals happy life, is just not quite going to wash anymore. And the young people have woken up to that now. I know when I was at school, I felt like I had a really, I was very lucky. I was sent by my wonderful, hardworking grandparents to a private school in Surrey. But with that came this kind of entitlement that seemed to run through everything, where it was kind of, most people told, work hard, get good grades, blah, blah, blah. And there was this sort of sense of, everyone else can sort of scrub along, but I'll be all right because my dad's just bought me a Golf GTI. And that feels really, really important to change. We haven't spoken about us all being women and things, but I think in terms of, it's particularly male entitlement as well, that sort of, I will take because I can, and this is where I am in the world. And then flipping it to everything we're doing, which feels like it's entirely based on a kind of gratitude attitude, where we just feel really grateful. And I think we've all said at various points, just feel that we've taken opportunities and been grateful for opportunities that have come our way to get where we are, and to have the experiences and the stories that we have as well. So I just wanted to throw that in there, really. Gratitude for the fact that we're all incredible and all our children are incredible. So
yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Yeah, I was just going to add, to that kind of mini adults in the making thing. I think, again, until at systems level we stop measuring things in terms of GDP, we're always going to have that. What does what's the economic benefit of an A instead of a B? The judgments like that within education. And I think it's interesting for me in switching it to an economic argument around well-being and looking at that as a measure of thriving of at the level of person and at the level of a city even. And I think, I understand naturally that parents want to shape their child's future and give them the experiences and enable their education, but actually young people's voice should be centered in that. And I think if you can enable a system that holds itself accountable to well-being and the huge broad measures that look at well-being as an economic argument, then actually you set the foundation. And ultimately, isn't that what we all want? Young people to be happy in who they are. And actually it allows them to then define within that, because you're holding a school accountable, you're holding a system accountable, but just to a different measure. And I think that is another systems level change that I would really like to see.
Yeah, I suppose for a while we're going to have to do both for a while. We're going to have our vision at the Hive is that we will, for the children who want to take external exams, will be supported and enabled to take them, GCSEs, SATs, International Baccalaureate as they go through, but those who do not wish to will not be made to. And that for a while we'll need to run with both systems. I think you can't just remove one system and not expect chaos to flow into the vacuum. But we need, and that's why the Rethinking Assessment group is so interesting. They're looking all around the world. And there's a few alternatives out there. There's a few towns and cities that are introducing digital badges, digital portfolios, that kind of from 4 years old all the way through to 16 or 18, that you take your portfolio with you when you go. But a lot of them, to me, are still held by the gatekeeper to that information is the institution that you are inside. It doesn't belong to you, the learner. It belongs to the person who's providing it for you. And somebody's still guiding your choices. And I suppose what I would love to see one day, I'm probably not going to see it in my lifetime, but I would love that one day we got to the point where the learner is holding on to the power and the learner knows the value of their own learning experiences and can articulate the value of the learning experiences that they have up to the point that they are trying to get into university or trying to get a job or trying to get something else, that they can talk about the journey that they made from liking diggers when they were 4 to, I don't know, doing a TEDx talk somewhere, and why that's important to what they want to do next. At the moment, I still feel like the people on the outside tell you what's important about the learning journey that you've been on, and they hold the value. And that's the shift that I would like to see come. That's what I'm interested in. And we use compassionate curiosity. I don't know if you know the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. I love him. I'll just say that out loud on a podcast. I do. I have a massive brain crush on that man. I think he's wonderful. And one of the things that he's done that's changed my life is introduce me to the idea of compassionate curiosity. So instead of saying, "Oh, what did you do that for?" or "Can't believe that thing happened," you reframe the question with, "I wonder why that happened," or "I wonder why I did that. Like, why now? Why here? Why those words? Why that behavior? I wonder what led to that happening." And it's a game changer. And so when you go through that process with children, with relationships or with learning, I wonder why you quit at that particular point, or I wonder why you didn't quit this time, or I wonder why you had an argument today and not yesterday, or I wonder why that happened. That's a really empowering way. Like it again, for me, a lot of it is about finding opportunities for children to take more power. You can't give power to children, I have learned. They have to take it from you. So you have to be willing to hand some of it over. And so I think there's going to be a push-pull for a while between the old system where all of the power is held by the institution, because we can't just hand it over overnight. That's not how it works. So we're going to have like an evolution. I'd like to see a gradual evolution from all of the power being held by the institution to most of it being held by the individual.
Thank you. Something that's been occurring to me as we've gone through this conversation, somebody mentioned earlier about the incredible demand that there is for this school, and people are talking about the demand that there is also within organizations for young people who aren't just like autonomous drones who do what they're told, but who are creative and innovative and can have confidence and can get along with people. And so there's an incredible amount of demand for the ideas that we're talking about here. And yet, as Hayley mentioned earlier, in the UK at least, like to set up an organization that extols and centralizes and promotes these values and these ways of being is shut down. And I think that's something that I'm hoping that we can do through this podcast and others like them, is to shine a light on all of this innovative practice. And it seems that there needs to be some pushback. If it's true that there's been a change in policy in the DFE or in Ofsted or wherever the decision has been taken to start shutting down alternative schools, like you are not dangerous people. I think that we can establish that. This is not like a madrasa that's going to be brainwashing young people into dangerous ways of thinking. This is like what the world needs actually, and so I hope that we can inculcate a little bit of compassionate curiosity among listeners to think about, I wonder if it's possible for me to set up a school like this, to do something different, to break out of the mainstream model and to look at alternative funding models and all the stuff that we've been talking to. So I want to come on to that as a final point, if I may. But first, can we just come back to this question about the fact that you're all female? Because that's something that I think is really interesting. And like I say, small sample size, but it's fascinating because lots of the people that I've read about and that I've been familiar with their work, who've worked in this field of like alternative education, self-directed learning, people like Ian Cunningham, who I worked with at SMLC, and A.S. Neal, and Peter, what's the guy called? Peter
Great.
Thank you, Peter Gray. His name escapes me. They're like the generation or two above us, right? And but it seems like there may be something in this, the fact that you're female and that your own children have gone to the schools that you've set up, and that was a big driving force. I wonder if there's anything in this, and whether anybody would like to speak to that. Hayley.
I think the answer is really simple. I mean, it's well logged, historically, that women have dominated education. Most schools are much more, filled with female teachers than they are with male. And also, it's, again, I remember having a conversation, reminds me, and that's why I was keen to step in, because this part of the conversation really reminds me of a chat that I had with a friend a few years ago, who went off on a trip around the world, somewhere in a very deprived country. I can't remember which one it was. And she was talking about how she visited an orphanage and how, she'd seen this orphanage. It was really quite upsetting, but at the same time, the things that the people were doing and the volunteers were absolutely amazing. And I'll never forget the way she just stood on the stairs in her in her hallway, and she just said to me, "It's always the women, isn't it? It's always the women that are there looking after the sickest, poorest, most vulnerable people." And that is true. Care homes are full of women. Schools are predominated by women. Orphanage, volunteers. I'm not saying, I'm not going on some major feminist rant, but it is a theme. And so when you say, "Isn't it strange that you're all women?" No, it's not, because this is a common thread. I know some fabulous men in education, and absolutely amazing, and have become, really good friends and fantastic professional confidants and all the rest of it. I have, 3 on my school improvement partners team at the moment. One of them being Guy Claxton, funny enough, as Kath was talking about his stuff the other day, and earlier on. And but I don't think it's a big bombshell that we're women. I think it's a bombshell that you're a man. And that you're running the podcast.
Yeah, well, I'll reflect further on that. Kate?
Maybe it's something to do with a change of platform. I wonder, because men write more books than women write, I think. But women talk in circles together a lot. And I think that we have always been the powerhouse in the background. We've always been the group that get together to fix the problems, to drive the engine. But the man is in the seat with the cool hat, tooting the horn, right? And now we have a platform that's different. We can sit in a circle and we can talk across the globe, and our voices can be shared. We don't have to stop raising children and running schools and fixing all of the world's problems. Because I've written a book. It took me 3 bloody years and it nearly killed me. Right? Trying to do that on top of everything else. There's no way I could write 16 books. I've got children to raise and a business to run and a house to clean. Like life, dogs to walk. And I wonder if it's that. I wonder if our voices are being heard because there's now a medium for our voices. Like, we've all taken half a day off work to do this. We're all going back to work. Like, I'm watching my phone out the corner of my eye to make sure there's no children on fire or the bus hasn't broken down. And I wouldn't be able to write a book and do that, but I can do this. So I don't know if maybe it's that.
Let's go, Kath, and then Lucy.
It's a big point. It's a good point. Very good point.
Yeah, and also I wonder whether, we were all brought up in this mainstream system of education, and that it's quite a kind of dominant, quite male, really, environment of someone knowing holding all the information, and then you being sort of a submissive recipient of that information and trying to remember as much as possible. And I wonder whether that's a reaction to that, whether it's a balancing out, yin and yang, if you like, of us coming back up again, really, and saying, hang on a minute, let's go from dominant to relational to collaborative. Let's make sure that the children have a voice. And also it's all we're talking about, it's about birthing, isn't it? It's like it's the seeding of this idea, these kind of oak trees that are probably going to be, we're not as old as we might well be. The sort of ripples of our endeavors are going to go way beyond the end of our lifetimes, hopefully. And that kind of planting of those acorns now feels really important, and kind of actually it's kind of egoless, really, because just this stuff just needs to happen. We need to have these conversations. We need to be sitting around here. We've all taken half a day off work because it just has to happen. We need that balance. We need something to kind of shift again to enable our kids and the generations and 7 generations to come. I think, as Mac McCartney always talks about, we need to be sat around that fire making those decisions and making sure that the well-being and the welfare of children now and beyond are looked out for.
Thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if we're necessarily a representative sample. It'd be interesting to know that. But I think, what we've really touched on in this conversation is the relational and collaborative aspect of what it is that we do and what is needed in order to enable voice and young people. That is encapsulated in the feminine. That's not to say man can't have that feminine take as well. I think what's typical of schools currently in the UK, particularly the academy model, is that they are incredibly managerial in nature. They encapsulate the boardroom mentality, and that which is typical of that kind of masculine top down way of doing things. So I think that's potentially a reason as well. It's not to say at all that men can't do the same thing. I think it just, whoever is able to work in a relational way is what is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Would like to echo that. So it's true about this sample thing, and I would like to know more. This idea that the Rethinking Education Mighty Network and the podcast is sort of acting like a bat signal to bring together people who are working in these innovative ways. I would really love to hear from more people out there. If you're listening to this and you know of anything like what we've been hearing about today, please get in touch, because I'd love to hear more about what's happening out there. And with this in mind, as a final question, if there's anyone listening to this who's thinking this actually may be doable, maybe I could start a school or an alternative to school, if they have a seed in their mind or in their belly, or possibly both, what would you say to them? And so let's start with Hayley and we'll work our way around.
That's an easy one. Get a consultant to help you. Get somebody who knows the rules and regulations about running an independent school, if you're looking to run an independent school, if what we're doing has an influence. And I mean, even if you're not, even if you're looking at trying to do something, on Lucy's model, or a self-directed, kind of more sort of more of a homeschool type group, then I just get some professional help, because otherwise I think it can be really wading through honey. And with the best, kind of utopian ideas and ideals for reform, it's painful when you don't know how the system that you're trying to work within actually works. And once you know what they want, you can find the language within your context to make sure that it transfers into something that people like Ofsted, DfE understand. So get the help up front. That would be, that's the best investment I made.
Thank you very much. And just to be clear, when you say get professional help, that means people who know how to set up a school rather than, some psychological assistance.
Yeah, no, I mean, you'll need that too. There's no doubt about it. Have your therapist ready. But because you probably will need them. But no, what I mean is I had a practicing Ofsted inspector consultant work with me right from day one, who lucky, I found somebody and I've found other people since actually who genuinely really believe in the reform, but understand the standards, that understand the framework that you're going to be judged by, because there has been unfortunately a history of alternative progressive schools not doing that well with Ofsted, and that's not helping us. That's not helping our cause, because all that does is push us further down the road to, I'll take it because my kid doesn't really work anywhere else, so I don't really care how they do with Ofsted. And it also it's not credible. It's not credible for us to exist within a system when our alternative approach is not proving an impact. If it doesn't prove an impact with the people that matter, whether we like it or not, it's not a good badge to have. It's not okay to say, well, we've got all these fantastic utopian ideals and it's brilliant, we're going to change the world. But actually, the people who judge whether that impact is good on children's outcomes for the rest of their lives don't think it's very good. That's not working. That's not working. So, as much as I want to say, up the ante and fingers to the system, that system will be part of what helps my children to thrive, because it will bring other children into my school and so on and so on. And it's credible and it's unavoidable. So therefore, just learn what it's all about, and then you'll understand it better, and then you'll be able to say, you know what, I can relax. My children are making progress. I can prove it. I just need to learn the language and the way to prove it.
Yeah.
And that's been a big part of my journey, where I've just, gone from being like, just tell me what to do and what to say, to, now training my staff last night in how to verbalise what Atelier is about. Because when I sat down and said to them, describe our curriculum, they looked at me blankly. These are people who've worked in education for years. Just what are our aims for education? Now, all the information's there, but it's washing around up here, and it's kind of a bit of this and a bit of that. And it's like, no. Okay, let's be clear. Our curriculum is made up of 5 key pillars of time that children spend, and with these aims. Our aims are these. This is what we're looking for. Lifelong learning, motivation, efficacy, blah, 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 blah. And actually, when you really break that down, and as I said, having been through a mock inspection for 3 days last week, it's through those couple of years of really honing those conversations with a consultant that I was able to do it absolutely off the bat. And her response was, wow, your vision is so strong. It wasn't articulated strongly 18 months ago, but I've practiced it. And now I know that I can defend my school and defend the impact it's making with credibility, I think. I hope. Fingers crossed. I'll be egg on my face if we do badly now, won't it?
Thank you. There's some good practical advice there. Lucy, what would you say to our would-be school starter?
I would really sit down with yourself and detangle whether it's just a desire to have something different for your children and I wish I could make a change, with I've got the capacity to undertake a project. Do not underestimate the massive impact that it has and how hard it is. That's not to detract anybody, because it probably wouldn't have detracted me at all, but it's so much more than an idea. And then I echo what Hayley said, be really clear what the skills are that you have, and find the ones that you don't. So my first person that I recruited was a project manager who won't be embarrassed if I say, because she would tell you the same, but she describes her brain as a robot brain. I do not have a robot brain. You need someone with their Excel spreadsheet and 10,000 colours, lines, timings, etc.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Hayley, I think we're going to have to say goodbye to you now. So let's just, do you want to say any last words before you leave us?
Well, first of all, just thank you so much. It's been a really pleasurable afternoon. It's been amazing to meet these wonderful ladies. We've been in a clandestine fashion setting up our own WhatsApp group live whilst the podcast is going on, which we now have because we're also inspired by each other. So, if that isn't power to the multitasking woman, I don't know what is. I echo what everyone else has said. We're obviously very, very aligned in our values, which is brilliant. And thank you to you, James, for bringing such a platform together, because it's your work and your time and your energy and capacity and desire to want to get the conversation bigger, more regular and deeper, that will make the shift. Little things do make things happen. They do make a shift. So yes, thank you to all, and it's been fabulous, and I hope to stay in touch.
Yes, indeed. We'll have you back. Did you know about the campfire conversations that we're having every other Saturday? So I'll send you some details about that. We'll have to get you to join us by the campfire sometime.
Definitely.
I'd love to.
Sure.
Lovely. Thank you. There you have it, folks. So the revolution won't be televised, but it will be podcasted. Let's go to Kate and then Kath.
So very helpful and practical advice from Lucy and Hayley so far. So I guess I'll add the softy human bit. Get a good team around you. I think as we've all alluded to, it's bloody hard work opening a school. The fact that we've done it, 3 of us have done it in a pandemic as well, is just bonkers. But there's so much to learn. So you go on a really steep learning curve when you open a school. And so you're going to be in and out of that learning pit, in and out of the gorse bush of doubt, in and out of all of those difficult change cycles. And so it's really important to have people around you who believe in you and who believe in your vision, because so many people will throw rocks at your vision and tell you that it can't be done. So this is a good gang. Like now I feel like I'm part of a gang of another, of women who are doing the same thing as me, and having my vision echoed and also my challenges echoed back at me is hugely reassuring. So take the time to find your tribe, if you like. The Mighty Network is full of us. That's the bat signal that we've all answered, and we've all found each other in there. And remember to look after yourself. You will need to fuel regularly, and you will need to rest regularly. This is a marathon and not a sprint, but oh my God, it's worth it. It is the most valuable work I think that I have ever done. So if you're worrying if you can do it, you can. Just be deliberate about it. Get the right team in place. Get your support crew in place. Get a plan in place, and then one step at a time, because it's worth it.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Kath.
Oh, wow, I get the final word. I better make this good. I think I'm going to start with a warning that it will occupy your entire brain all the time. Because I know that even at 4 a.m, I'm sort of like got my cogs whirring, just going, oh, I've just got this great idea. I just need to do that. And people get messages from me at all times of the day and night. I'm still breastfeeding my youngest son. So that kind of adds to the thinking time that I have. Yes, and echoing what everyone else has said, find a great team. I love that video, I think, that's on YouTube, where there's a guy who goes and does a crazy dance by a river, and then he's just there on his own for a while, and then suddenly someone else comes and joins him and starts doing the crazy dance as well, and and then suddenly the whole riverside is just like full of people doing crazy dancing. Like, find that follower, find that wingman who just gets you and gets the vision, and you together can then do incredible things. And I feel very lucky that I found several incredible wingmen to help, and who do reflect the different elements of my lacking personality. I'm rubbish with details. I find them really frustrating, but one of my friends is brilliant with details and has that kind of dose of realism, like, come off your utopian ideal, Kath, like, just, we need to do this now. And so, yeah, project managers are brilliant for that. And get people together who are real doers. What you want is the people who are not so much away from, because you get a lot of people who are away from, but the people who are really positive and towards something different. And that will really make everything just suddenly light up and go on fire. But yeah, look after yourself as well, and also be happy with uncertainty and trying new things. It's a constant test and learn, test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. And the whole thing for me has been one giant inquiry project that I'm sure Kath Murdoch would enjoy picking the bones out of very much. But yeah, I'll have to draw it in some kind of crazy diagram one day. But it's been great to talk about it, and also to meet everyone here. It's just been fabulous. Thank you, James.
Absolute pleasure. Well, thank you all once again. I love the way that you describe this process that you've been on, this journey that you've all been on. You're enacting exactly the qualities that we're talking about wanting the young people to develop, where they're caring about the planet, they're caring about one another, they're looking after themselves, and acting out of curiosity and compassion. This is what we want to see, and you're absolutely walking the talk. It's been really lovely to spend this time with you. I hope that we've inspired 100 such projects to spark and take root, and whatever metaphor you want to use. So thank you all very much for taking the time out of your packed schedules to share your stories, and I look forward to hearing how you get on in the future.
Thank you so much, James. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me back, buddy.
Time is a measure of change. We don't have much time. Time is a measure of change.